Hello, fellow innovators. This is Patrick Emmons.
And this is Shelley Nelson.
Welcome to the Innovation and the Digital Enterprise Podcast, where we interview successful visionaries and leaders, giving you an insight into how they drive and support innovation within their organizations. Today, we're welcoming Dustin Kirkland to the show. Dustin is the Chief Product Officer at Apex Clearing. As Chief Product Officer, Dustin is responsible for defining the vision and evolving the strategy of Apex's product portfolio. His team of product managers interface with Apex customers and Apex engineers on a daily basis, ensuring quality, excellence, completeness, and timely delivery of the Apex product roadmap. Prior to Apex, Dustin led a key Google Cloud product initiative, bringing Kubernetes into the enterprise data center, helping some of the world's largest banks modernize their aging infrastructure. Dustin also spent a decade at Canonical as an engineer, product manager, and VP of product, creating the Ubuntu server Linux distribution and associated commercial offerings. Dustin was also the CTO and chief architect of Gazang, a venture-funded startup acquired by Cloudera, which provided data encryption and key management services to regulate healthcare and financial institutions. Dustin started his career at IBM building some of the fundamental Linux security functionality that enabled IBM to bring Red Hat Enterprise Linux to Wall Street and the enterprise. Dustin graduated magna cum laude from Texas A&M University with a Bachelor's of Science degree in computer engineering.
Welcome to the show, Dustin.
Hey, thanks, Shelley. Thanks, Patrick.
Dustin, if you don't mind, could you share with our listeners a little bit about what Apex Clearing is?
Yeah, of course. So Apex is a custodian. We provide clearing and custody services to many of the most disruptive fintechs, financial technology firms, offering brokerage and investment services. We've been around since about 2012. Our parent company, Peak Six, is based in Chicago. And Peak Six it's sort of a family office with an interesting collection of companies, many of which have disrupted the investment landscape. Apex specifically, we provide financial services, software as a service, basically a SaaS platform, APIs for opening brokerage accounts, buying and selling securities, trading, holding those securities. And many of our technologies were quite disruptive, including fractional share offering and instant account opening.
I love the concept around the fractional share, right? Could you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah. So, rewind, 5 or 6 years ago, and the only way to buy securities, stocks, it was in whole share increments. And so you could buy 1 or 2 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 shares of any given stock. And so if a stock Ford is $5 or $6 a share and you've got $100, well, that's great. You can buy 15 or 20 shares of Ford if you've got $100. But a stock like Amazon, which trades at $3,000 a share, or Google, which is like $1,800 a share, or even Facebook at $300 a share. If all you have is $100 to your name, you can't own those, what we call blue chip stocks, if you have to buy in whole share increments. And over the course of, I guess, the last 100 years of trading in the stock market, or a couple hundred years really, some stocks would split in order to lower the share price, which didn't change the overall value. If it were a 2-for-1 or a 3-for-1 or a 5-for-1 or a 10-for-1 split, it's simple math. But that would turn the share price down to something quite a bit smaller that, would be more accessible. Now, fast forward to really just a couple of years ago, and fractional trading of shares, being able to buy a third of a share of Amazon, or a third of a share, a quarter of a share of Facebook, is actually possible now. And in fact, we often talk about it in terms of notional value instead of fractional value. So instead of saying, I want to buy 1/10 of a share of Tesla, you would say, I want to buy $100 of Tesla. Figure it out, like whatever that means. And so Apex provides an API for real-time trading, buying and selling notional and fractional values of about 6,000 different symbols in real time, meaning instantly. Your order is filled, buy or sell, within milliseconds, as opposed to rolling it up with a whole bunch of other orders and placing a bigger order for hundreds of shares in a larger lot.
Hmm. Yeah, the image that comes to mind for me is you remember the movie Swingers
Of course.
when they go to the
So money, you don't even know it.
like they go to the casino and they sit down, they've got like $100 and it's like $25 a hand. And he's like, double down. You always double down. Like, but I only have $25 left. Like, so how do you do that? Like, of course, it's like, okay, so let's go to let's go to the lower cost tables. But like for some of that, right, especially out in Vegas, there's it's great when you can find a $5 table, but they're always packed. Right. The $15 tables, I'm not much of a gambler, so I go to just have fun. So I'd never really go to the big pots. It's too much.
It's crazy to think that's the guy behind The Mandalorian now, Jon Favreau.
It is. Yeah, what a fantastic career, right?
Oh my God, it's amazing.
So so much distance between that and Rudy, if you remember.
Yeah, of course.
That's really where all that started, with him and what's his face, Vince Vaughn was Rudy. Anyways, we're not here to talk about Rudy. Much to my dismay, and I think I've told the story before. It's like my roommates in college threw my copy of Rudy out the window. I watched it every night after going out drinking. So, and favorite scene in Goon is when he walks up to the girl and she's crying. He's like, "Why are you crying? Did you just watch Rudy?" And it's like, "Yes, of course. That's when you cry." I do want to talk about the industry itself, right? Clearing, custody, like you mentioned. There's a lot of established. You guys are being disruptive in something that's one of those really very established industries. It seems to be a bit of your pattern of your careers. Is that something you just enjoy? Do you enjoy the friction of that type of environment?
I love the opportunity around being an underdog, and so it is a bit of a theme of my career to start with the underdog and work our way up. At Apex, we're well established. We're behind hundreds of clients. Stash, M1, based there in Chicago, where you are, Ally, eToro, SoFi, Webull. These are our clients. We're a B2B. And every single one of those are brokers or brokerages that are catering to a new audience. We talk about millennials or just sort of younger investors. Younger investors are engaged in a really exciting market at a really interesting time in ways that I wasn't 20 years ago. In my early 20s. And I think that's awesome. I think that's inspiring, and I think part of what we provide at Apex are the real-time, low-cost, disruptive fintech tools necessary for those financial advisors and those brokerages to offer what they do: a mobile experience, a real-time, instant experience, and the ability for people with just a couple $100 to actually begin their investment journey. And yeah, it is a little bit of an underdog story, I think, in that the Charles Schwabs and the Fidelities and the much bigger brokers, the Morgan Stanleys and so forth, E-Trade, TD, they've been around for many decades, and to some extent the infrastructure and the tooling and the experience shows. And so where we are being disruptive is in providing that instant, dynamic, modern experience, and the response has been tremendous from a newer, younger wave of investors.
That's great. And that whole democratization, as you talked about, we've spoken about before, that making it so that it's easier to engage, right? So the traditional, the way it's been done for like forever, right? And then they moved to a web platform, but it really, in essence, didn't change much. It was just, removing that broker level resource. And if I was a better podcast host, I would have been able to stitch together the Rudy thing to the underdog thing a little bit better. I mean, it was just laying there, and I left it. I feel bad. Maybe I'll
I thought that's where you're going. I thought that's where you're going.
It's sometimes just genius by accident. That's all I can tell you. right? Like it's not intentional. Just, the brain's moving faster than the mouth, if you can believe that.
Well, how about the real life Rudy, Sarah Fuller? I mean, just what an amazing story. I've got two daughters, and we've watched her play football over these last couple of weekends. My 8-year-old asked me, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago, or at the beginning of the football season, "Hey, Dad, can girls play football?" And it was kind of an uncomfortable, "Yeah, of course." But boy, I mean, Sarah Fuller, Vanderbilt, just amazing,
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, it's that whole concept, and like my boy stepped away from football this year, and honestly, I was kind of relieved. I mean, it's big, it's fast, bigger and faster than it's ever been. It's just it's impressive that she's out there, and I think it'll be interesting to see what comes of that next, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things we talked about that from the previous conversation was that concept of visionary, right? Like, what does a visionary look like inside, right? I think visionaries are people that sometimes struggle with being inside of an organization, but it's something that you've been able to successfully do. And I wanted to get your thoughts on, like, what have you done to make that obviously competent, capable, all of those things. There's plenty of those folks out there that are competent and capable and still sometimes aren't successful at staying true to that being a visionary. What are some of the things that, what's your rules, what's your philosophy, what's your approach?
Yeah, it's an insightful question. I think if I could find a younger version of myself and give myself some advice, I think I would tell me to stick with those controversial ideas, those early ideas, and don't get frustrated when other people don't see it quite the way you see it at that time. I spent the first 8 years of my career at IBM as a software engineer here in Austin, Texas. I worked on Linux from the very early days of IBM and investing in Linux in the Linux Technology Center as a sort of an outlet for creativity, which is not something you get to do a whole lot of as a very junior engineer in a very big company. IBM had this tremendous program for innovation through its software patents. And these were the early years of the patent wars between IBM and Microsoft and some of the other software companies, and especially around open source. It was about IBM carving out some space for Linux and the other open source projects to be able to operate. And IBM was quite defensive with the patents, and so I did a lot of work filing patents. I think I filed 75 patents in just a couple of years,
Wow.
2 or 3 years. And some of those are, really interesting technologies that, you might recognize today. The thing that I wish I would have done a bit more of was to have stuck with some of those inventions and really tried to see some of those through. I think I got better at that in my career, especially as I moved into product management, where you actually have the opportunity, or I've found the opportunity to cross over from the pure engineering ideation, the creation, but also creating the business and the business model and the products and the pricing and the marketing and the go-to-market around it. I've found product management to be quite fulfilling from that perspective.
Interesting. And as that product manager, right? You mentioned you've expanded your sphere of influence of sorts, right? So it's not so much the chain of command, but really having influence outside of just top and what's above you and what's below you. So if you could share a little bit more about that as well.
Product management is an interesting discipline in that, well, I'll start here. There's no degree in product management, none really
Right.
to speak of, right?
Not yet.
Not
I
yet.
mean, clearly, yeah, there's got to be at some point.
It would make for an interesting MBA or some sort of MBA engineering sort of cross degree.
Uh-oh.
But what?
We're not talking MBAs again. That's a whole nother deal.
Yeah, but I wasn't going to go there, Patrick.
Sorry for that.
That's all right. Yeah, I mean, I often say no one ever goes to their 6th grade, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" and say, "I want to be a product manager when you grow up." There's no ment that makes product managers. There's no degree that anoints product managers. And so it's an interesting someone's path to product management. It's always one of my interview questions when I'm interviewing product managers. How did you become a product manager? And there's a lot of insight to be derived from what drew someone through their career and their experiences into product. One of the important things about a product manager is that we rarely manage people. It's not a position where power is derived from how many reports, right? It's not the typical. It's not like a military position where you've got a chain of command. It's also quite different from a typical software company in the United States, where there's a hierarchy of first line managers and then second line managers and directors and VPs typically. A product manager has to own a vision. We started with the discussion around the visionary. That's part of it. And they've got to realize that vision, typically without people reporting to them. And so the thing that product managers have to master is the art of influence, being able to influence people, and lots of really different people, and an engineer, teams of engineers, a salesperson or a team of salespeople, a marketing team, and then eventually the industry, right? It's a matter of communicating the product vision, the market opportunity when talking to journalists, analysts, podcasters such as yourself. It's an interesting dynamic role from that perspective, and it's all about the influence that a product manager has that determines whether they are their product is successful or not. And then the success of their product is often tied to the success of that product manager.
So how do you go about that? How do you build relationships? I know it's different in every organization, but what advice would you give?
Yeah, it is about the relationships. Invest in those early and often. Expanding that sphere of influence. A sphere goes in three directions, right? Up, down, left, right, in every direction. It's not just about working with managing up the executives above you, which is that's the first thing that a super ambitious, upward moving product manager who wants to be, the next VP or the next CEO of the company. Too often, those product managers will focus a little bit too much on just the upward radius. There's also the downward radius, working through the entire organization, getting to know the interns and the new hires, some coaching, some learning from them. In fact, hey, where are your problems? Where do you see issues with the architecture of the solution or the code? And then moving outward, so up, down, and then outward, out into the other parts of the org, sales, marketing, immediately come to mind because, as a product manager, you're obviously trying to build a product that you can sell, and you're obviously trying to build a product that you can get out there and market. But don't stop there. It's the support organization, it's the operations, it's IT, it's security. These are also stakeholders of product, and so building relationships with every one of those people and those teams, it's essential. If this sounds a little bit like the CEO, that's the way Ben Horowitz and others describe the product manager. You have to be the CEO of your product. It is absolutely, and I take that to heart, and I think good product managers generally take that advice. Really own and be the CEO of your product, of your little world. Take that to heart, and it doesn't matter how big or small the product is. You can run it, like a company. Think through the P&L, think through the growth, and what it's going to take to get there.
That's great advice. Thank you.
I was thinking as you're talking about that, that line of ascension, right? You mentioned going from VP to CEO. I think, historically, and my perception, I'm not saying this is right, my perception was that salespeople became the CEO. Is your perception that as we move more, and most organizations are moving more towards that product centric, especially if you're looking at a digital platform, of moving from that project to product mentality? Do you see that currently as a norm in certain industries? Do you see that becoming more of a norm in other industries where the elevation from VP of product is to go to CEO, as opposed to more just curious of your perspective?
Yeah, so I think at least in Silicon Valley, the the path from product manager through the ranks to CEO is pretty well documented. Sundar Pichai is the CEO of Alphabet, of Google. He was the product manager for Chrome, the web browser, once upon a time. Marissa Mayer, the former CEO of Yahoo, was the product manager for the search bar inside of Google once upon a time. Satya Nadella, Microsoft's CEO, also a former product manager at Microsoft. So, those are software examples. Those are big software companies. But that path is pretty well established at this point. I don't know that exists quite so much in financial services or the fintech industry yet. But as fintech becomes more tech, I think to some extent it's inevitable that product managers end up, at least with a seat at the table. And I certainly value that. I love that about where I am in the Apex org, where product is in the Apex org, Apex organization. I'm part of the executive committee. My product managers present to the executive team on a weekly basis about the projects and the products that we're working on. And that's part of that sphere of influence, me helping develop my team and my people and ensuring that they have the exposure to the executive team and the board of directors, and that they also have the buy-in and the support of the executives that are ultimately their stakeholders.
If somebody was interested in making that cut over to being more of a product focused person, and yes, like you mentioned, there's not like a clear path of education, or how does somebody get involved? How would you recommend people, somebody was involved in, either more of the engineering side or maybe project management side, or not at all involved in like digital product development? How would you suggest they get started?
In product management specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes to me, the makeup of a successful product manager in my spheres, and this may differ for different types of companies, but I've spent most of my career in software, specifically software as a service or SaaS type platforms. It begins with an engineering mindset, and that might be an engineering degree, like I graduated in computer engineering. It could be the equivalent experience, 5 or 10, whatever time frame one needs working as an engineer, maybe a developer, maybe an engineering manager. But it really takes that foundation, that bedrock, typically to build off of. Now, there are ways to compensate and overcompensate for that, but that's usually the starting point. But there comes a point where there's a crossover from being a problem solver and dealing with finite, discrete problems that have hard, real solutions, to looking at business problems, which often aren't so discrete. They aren't so perfect. In fact, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of ambiguity, and a typical product manager mindset will sort of be able to straddle both of those, understand the engineering and the technology and the mathematical problems that have mathematical solutions, but also the business side of things, which often has more subjective, often softer solutions, multiple solutions, in fact, and being able to play the heuristic or the statistical game that one has to play in order to create business solutions. So having just a little bit of that business savvy is the first step, I think, in the crossover into the product management space. And then there's sort of a third leg to the stool that is the thing that I think brings it all together. And it really comes with the communication skills. And sometimes that's the outgoing type A personality, the speaking, the speaking engagement. And then it could be on stage, on a keynote, on a podcast, but talking to a journalist or an analyst. But it doesn't always have to manifest itself in sort of an extroverted sense. There's lots of product managers who are quite good at the communications side of things and take a more introverted approach. And that involves lots of clear writing and communication and other forms of communication. That piece is I think the third and final piece that I usually look for when hiring, building, developing product managers. An engineering mindset, some business savvy, and then impeccable communication skills.
Very cool. That's not an easy three legs of a stool to find, right? That's like three superpowers all in one. So I mean, just that whole middle part on the business savvy of like being able to strategically analyze a landscape that some you can see, some you can't even see, some you make up in your head because that's got to be that ninja move of like, how do we get around the entire industry? Like, what is it that people aren't doing that
Hmm.
they should be doing? It seems like a huge challenge.
Hmm.
For the people that like people who like doing puzzles and things like that, right? Like enjoy that kind of complexity. I would think it'd be like a dream job.
Yeah, to me, it is a dream job. I genuinely love product management. I enjoy coding. I enjoy writing code. I'll still find a problem to solve on a weekend, and I'm teaching my daughters to code. But I get a whole different level of fulfillment out of the product management exercises and just that discipline. To me, it's a step past designing, developing the solution, and actually putting it into people's hands in one form or another. That's the rest of the cycle that personally I was missing from, commit code, push code to a GitHub repository, and now my job is done. That was sort of where it ended for me from a developer standpoint. The product manager mindset for me is taking that and now putting it on a shelf somewhere, and that's I mean that from a figurative sense, But in the real world, product managers do put physical things, on shelves, and that's it's a slightly different world, but it's the full cycle.
That's great. Shelley, I guess I'm going to leave it to you to ask that last question.
Well, I mean, one of the other questions we like to ask, who inspires you? Who's been your mentor over the years?
Yeah, great question. Wow, so many. I'll answer both of those actually. So, where do I go to learn? I'm a voracious reader. I love reading. In fact, it's one of the things that I miss a little bit in the stay-at-home pandemic world, in that my reading time was on planes, and I typically flew 100 to 150 flights per year. And a couple of years ago, I turned off the Wi-Fi. I quit fighting around with go in-flight Wi-Fi and dropping connection. It's just such a disaster. I gave up on it, and I said, you know what? I got 2, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 8 or 10 hours. I'm not watching the movies. I'm gonna read, and that was maybe 2016. And as of 2016, I hit a new high point of 50, 60, 70 books a year. A book a week, basically. And that slowed down a little bit in the pandemic because I'm home, which is nice, but I got 2 little girls that want and deserve all the attention in the world, and there's just not as much time to sit back and crack a book. But that's always been important to me. Patrick, in the prep for this podcast, you mentioned The Hard Thing About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz book I'd read a couple of years ago. I went back and reread that one this past Friday. Fantastic book.
One of my favorites.
What a great manual, how to be a CEO, or how to be a CEO of your product. Ben Horowitz was a product manager. He talks about that in his book. He was product manager for Mozilla at one point in his career. So from that perspective, I do really love reading, and it's almost entirely nonfiction. Being somewhat new to the financial services industry, I've tried to crank through a bunch of books, and typically the books that our investors might have read, just in what are they trying to get into their head? What are they expecting out of an investment platform? And some of those are, the older books that have been around for decades and generations, the Benjamin Grahams and the Random Walk Down Wall Street, and, just sort of the timeless classics. Some are the, the more recent, the Joel Greenblatt's or Burton Malkiel. These are just sort of the investors or economics professors. Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century was the last book I read before that. I find these fascinating, and it's a way of just, getting to know this industry a little bit better.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, it's a pattern we see time and time again, right? Leaders are learners, right? And like you got to constantly invest in it. I do share your same situation of like I used to drive a lot, so that's when I'd listen to books on, right?
There you go.
Audible. I love Audible. I know people are like, "Oh, it's not real reading." I'm like, you do you.
I do a bit of both. I love Audible as well. I've subscribed to Audible for years and cranked through the credits. But I mean, you can see the bookshelf behind me. I've got a bookshelf full of books here. Some books I read both. I'll do the Audible and then I'll do the physical, or vice versa. And some are just I really want to get everything I can out of it.
Yeah, I think there's some books, like to your point, I always think like there's some books you just have to study, right? Where it's like there's so much good stuff in there where it's like
different times in your life too. It sometimes it's a matter of it meant something to you at one point in your life, but 4, 5, 6 years later, the world's changed, your career's changed.
It's true. I was trying to explain to my kids, we were making rockets, those model rockets that you can launch, and I said, when I was your age, I'd just hustle through it just because I want to make the thing go up and explode. But when you get older, like you actually spend time packing the parachute the right way, putting wadding in there, right? It's like, but when I was their age, it would have been like 15 minutes after I bought the rocket, it's up in the air, right? All burned up, destroyed, right? But
Well, I mean, what an interesting time to be alive, especially I'm not into model rockets. I know people who are, but right now with SpaceX, Virgin Galactic, just the things going on, Blue Origin in the world, there's something real and tangible about the model rocket, and then inspiring a kid, to learn math, learn physics, learn science, and what the world is going to look like, especially from just the space industry in 5 or 10 years is. We're not going to recognize it. Patrick, Shelley, I think there's some really exciting things that's going to happen right there.
Mm-hmm.
My son did mention, he's like, he's looking at, so he's in high school. He's thinking, I asked what you want to go to school for. He's like astronomical, aeronautical. And I'm like, is it really still a thing? And then I thought, you know what I mean? Like, I think there hasn't been a whole lot of innovation there, which then of course, to your point, means it's ripe for disruption. Anything where it's like, it's been a little bit, but yeah, to your point, clearly the last couple of years have been very exciting with all those new developments. So it's an exciting world in many ways.
Well, then I've got to put a plug in for my alma mater then for your son, if he's interested in the aeronautics industry. Texas A&M University, one of the only public universities in the country with a land, sea, and space grant. And I've got a couple of friends who went through the aerospace engineering program at Texas A&M in College Station, and have had awesome careers at NASA and in the private sector as well.
That's cool. I made a decision to go north for college. I think I'm going to give him some wisdom about not making that same choice. There are schools south of Chicago. I didn't know that. And so heading up to the great white tundra of Green Bay was, I love my school, but, it'd been nice to see the sun for 70% of my college career. That would have been a bonus. But yeah, it's he's thinking Purdue. He loves the idea of Purdue, but
there you go. But, yeah. Good old engineering school for sure.
A lot of great schools out there. So awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today. It's really awesome what you're doing. Really great that you shared your background and your experience. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, I love connecting with good people, Shelley. Patrick, thank you very much. And, to your listeners, I appreciate your attention. It means a lot to me and the people around me to be able to tell our story.
Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you.
We also want to thank our listeners. Thank you for tuning in, and we really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us. And if you'd like to receive new episodes as they're published, you can subscribe by visiting our website at dragonspears.com/podcast, or find us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This episode was sponsored by Dragon Spears and produced by Dante32.